Hey there, my fellow author. I'm Sarah Elizabeth Sawyer, an old soul kind of writer living my dream as a full-time author and authorpreneur. But I didn't start out living a confident, creative lifestyle. I struggled with the fears and the mental and emotional barriers that so often plague writers at all stages of their author career. But the truth is that with the right knowledge, tools, and training, you can overcome those barriers. I'm here to teach you how I've developed a lifestyle that's allowed me to publish 19 books and counting. Each week, as you tune into the Confident Fiction Author podcast, you'll get clarity on the steps you need to take to advance your writing career. Whether it's developing your ideal writing routine, tackling new skills like dictating your fiction, or overcoming the obstacles life throws your way, this podcast will help you live a more confident, creative lifestyle. Let's get started. Hey there, my friend, and welcome to this week's episode of the Confident Fiction Author podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Elizabeth Sawyer, and if you read the title of this podcast episode and you have any experience at all with writing fiction, you might be laughing right now. I mean, we're talking the agony and the torment that we go through as fiction authors and the idea of writer's block. And this just leads us to the insanity of thinking fiction writing can be effortless, or really that anything about your life can be effortless. So that was basically my response or my thought process to the idea of making things effortless or things being effortless when I first heard about this book called Effortless, written by Greg McKeown. But I was intrigued and I read his first book, Essentialism. I've talked about that before on the podcast. You can check it out. It's episode number 14, and I also talk about it in number 15 of breaking free from overwhelm and decluttering your author life to make room for creativity. So just this idea of your life being the most essential things. And so I heard about his book, Effortless, which is kind of a follow-up to the ideas in there. And he talks about effortlessness in that first book. But I was like, how do you actually apply this to life and what does it really mean? So I was intrigued. I read the first book and then I read Effortless, and I'm really glad that I read it and let it mature my thought processes around the idea of what effortless is. And I found that I do more of it in my life than I realized. Now, let me just say up front here that effortless doesn't mean easy. And it doesn't mean lazy. But one of the core ideas of this book and what I want to challenge you with today is that too often we make things in life, like fiction writing, harder than it needs to be. So let's dive into this wild concept that fiction writing can be effortless. The book by Greg McKeown, Effortless, is broken into 3 parts, and they are effortless state, so how can we make it easier to focus? Effortless action, how can we make essential work easier to do? And then effortless results, how can we get the highest return on the least effort? There are fantastic chapters, fantastic concepts in each of these sections. I'm just going to skip through a few of them and apply them to fiction writing for you today. The first one is invert, and it's asking yourself the question, what if this could be easy? I think as fiction authors, from the time we attempt to write our first story or we start reading craft books, we start hearing about the agony and the great highs and lows of being an artist, being a literary artist, what our forebears in literature went through and what our contemporaries go through today to produce words on the page, or just our own efforts to put words on the page, can really build up this mountain in our minds of having to scale and the trials and the suffering that we're going to have to go through to reach the top. As someone who has written and published 19 books, I've experienced all of this. I have experienced the great highs and lows and the difficulties and the challenges and the struggles of being an author. Looking back though, I can pinpoint places where I really made things harder than they needed to be. For example, I had an issue with book 4 in my Choctaw Tribune series, and I had the main character. She'd been through all of the books up to that point. She's younger, and I was about to introduce the love interest, the man that she was going to eventually marry. And this was just going to be so new in the series because she hadn't been, in other previous relationships and all. And I knew my readers were really anticipating, like, what is this romance going to be like? What is, who is this man going to be? And he's going to have to really be fantastic to deserve our Ruth Ann and all of the things. So I had a lot of pressure, plus the fact that I don't really write romance. And so the idea of tackling this just kept growing bigger and bigger in my mind. And I wrote the first 27,000 words. I had my outline. I wrote it and I hated it. I hated the direction that it was going. It just had a completely different feel than what I had wanted, what I had dreamed of for this book. And so I stopped writing that book for the longest time, and I put it aside because it had grown into such a mountain in my brain that I had no idea how I would scale it. I wish I'd had this question from Greg McKeown's book of, what if this could be easy? And ultimately, this is what broke me free in doing that book, is I had the two characters meet near the beginning of the story, and then she would eventually, some chapters later, head off to DC, and he would be a part of this entourage that was going to DC. And just having them meet in the beginning and starting that romantic tension early was totally the wrong thing for the book. And if I had been able to ask myself that question, what if this could be easy? I would have answered it with, don't have them meet in the beginning. And ultimately, this is what I finally came to, of placing him in DC, where she would meet him later on after I had gotten the story going, and so that I wasn't following the romance formula, because this wasn't a romance book and I didn't want to fall into the formula of your typical romance. And so my conclusion was, I need to have them meet later so I'm not in that formula. And it turned out it was very easy. It took work to redo my outline and to put him in a position in DC and all the things, but ultimately it was easy. And so whatever you're facing with your story or with your author career, ask yourself that question. What if this could be easy? What happens when you ask yourself questions like this is your brain gets to work on a solution that will put you in a more effortless state. Point number 2 here is enjoy. And the question that goes with that is, what if this could be fun? What a concept, right? Fiction writing, a lot of us got into it because it is fun. We enjoy reading fiction. We probably started out writing fiction because we enjoyed it. It was fun. It was a hobby. And it just seems like the more we get into studying the craft or trying to make a career with our writing, that we just lose the aspect of it being fun. And so in helping you get into that effortless state, ask, what if this could be fun? This was, again, a question that I wished I'd had back last year, but ultimately it came to myself. That's, like I said, whenever I was reading this book, I realized how much I was already in a line with it. But for me, making it fun was doing my 5-minute fiction. And I talk about that in episode number 10 of the podcast. That was my way of making fiction writing fun, the way it was when I was younger and starting out with just making up stories for fun about my stuffed animals or my dolls and writing those as stories. So my 5-minute fiction is just taking a throwaway story, just taking something that I have no intention of publishing. I'm not trying to craft the next great American novel. It's just something silly or adventurous or in a genre that I have no intention of publishing in. I don't want to explore it. I don't want to research it. I don't want to know what all the tropes are for that. And it has nothing to do with my author brand. It is just pure fun to work on that story. And anytime I want to walk away from it, I can. And I'm not abandoning a project that I was supposed to do. It was just a playground for me to have fun in until I was ready to take on my next serious project. And because I did that, it prepared me to take on the next project that I actually want to publish. And so ask yourself, what if fiction writing could be fun? Number 3 is release, the power of letting go. This is a big one, and I'm not going to go too deep into this because my episodes on the confidence to be a quitter as an author, that's episode 18, and then episode 19 of how not to quit writing and preventing or recovering from burnout. So I talk a lot about letting go and uncommitting from projects and things in your author life and just releasing those. So I did want to mention this because he talks about it in the book of just letting go. And sometimes there are projects, series as fiction authors that we need to just let go. We are not enjoying them. They have become a burden in our lives, and it feels like it just takes a lot of effort to work on those projects. And it may be something you need to just release and let go. Number 4 is rest, the art of doing nothing. This is one of my favorite ones. You know, I talk a lot about resting and taking time off. I spent a whole episode in number 16, The Art of Downtime, 3 R's for the author life. So go listen to that on how you can do rest to make fiction writing effortless, because that's something that I see with myself and the authors that I teach is they're like, sometimes I'm just too tired to get words on the page. What do I do in that case? And my answer is do nothing. It may be that you're at a point you just need to rest. You need physical rest, mental rest, emotional rest. And so when you take those times and you are well rested, it can help make your fiction writing effortless. So that's the last point that I want to cover from his first part in the book of being in an effortless state. Because if you're not in a state of effortlessness, of asking yourself, what if this could be easy? What if this could be fun? What do I need to let go of? What do I need to release? And then am I getting enough rest? And am I just doing nothing at points in my life so that I can be in that effortless state when it comes time to write my fiction? Part 2 is taking effortless action. So the first thing you want to do here is define. You want to define what done looks like. This is so hard, especially for if you're an author that you like to edit as you go. You want every sentence to be perfect before you write the next sentence, or you want that scene totally the way you think it should be before you write the next scene. And so it's really important when you're writing that first draft, especially, to define what done looks like. Is it, say, if you're an author who dictates your fiction like me, done for me with a writing session or with a first draft is just that I have completed my cleanup and my dictated draft looks as clean as if I had typed it. I don't do any edits. I leave myself tons of notes. It looks like a big mess, and that's what done looks like for me with a first draft. When it comes time to edit and publish, what does done look like on editing? How many rounds of revisions are you going to go through? How many editors are you going to hire? Will you have a beta team? Will you have readers who are committed to reading that book before it comes out and you make the changes? So there are a lot of things you can do in that process before you hit publish or before you send it off to your editor at a publishing house. It's really important to define what done looks like in each phase of your fiction writing. If you don't do that, what happens is you just end up in this loop that you keep repeating the same actions over and over, and you're no longer making improvements on your work and on your draft. whether it's the first draft or it's the draft about to go to publication, you get stuck in repeating things and making changes that are actually making the project worse and making it harder for you to let go, making it harder for you to see the value that you created, and making it harder on those around you who are supporting you in getting that book to publication. So the opposite of that is effortless action, and the first step you can take on that is defining what done looks like, so that when you hit done, you close that out, you stop working on it and move to the next step. Now, number 2 that I'm going to hit on in this section that he has in the book, and there are more steps in here, but I'm just highlighting a few and relating it for you as a fiction author, and that is progress, the courage to be rubbish. This chapter spoke to me probably more than any of the others, because as I was reading it, I realized it was defining me. This is pretty much how I approach any project in life, including my writing with my first drafts, and that is just giving myself permission to be rubbish and to just be a mess. And I'm totally okay with that in my life and in my fiction writing, because I know once it's out there, once it's rolling, I can make it better. I can go back and do my edits and get help from other people and ultimately bring it to readers in the best shape that it can be in. But it doesn't start out that way. It starts out as rubbish with my outlines and my notes, and then ultimately the first draft is an absolute disaster. That's why it helps sometimes to call that your 0 draft, not even your first draft, and that is your rubbish draft. One of the stories that Greg shares in this section, he talks about the competition that was put on to get companies and individuals to build the first human-powered flying machine. And so he talked about the companies and the teams that tried to get it done, and they spent months and months on their design, and then ultimately built the thing and it crashed. It didn't work. It wasn't able to fly the pattern, versus this father and son who very quickly built their first one, tried it, made modifications, tried it again, some 200 times, over 200 times before they were able to tweak it to the point that it could fly the pattern, and they won the competition. And so he says, similarly, in your own pursuit of what matters, if you want to, quote, build a better airplane, don't try to get everything exactly right the first time. Instead, embrace the rubbish, no matter how ugly it is, so that you can crash, repair, modify, and redesign fast. It's a far easier path for learning, growing, and making progress on what's essential. And I know for us as fiction writers, that is where I believe we do make fiction writing harder than it needs to be, when we are trying to get everything perfect at the get-go. If that is your process right now, I don't want to interfere with that. If you have something that is working for you, then absolutely go for it. But if you find yourself just stuck in that perpetual cycle of writing a little bit, editing a little bit, and it becomes so heavy and so frustrating for you that you abandon that project and you start a new one, and you promise yourself you're going to go back to that one, but you're on to the next story idea and you find yourself doing the same thing for it, and you abandon it and do the next one. So if you have all of these story ideas, but you're finding yourself with more unfinished manuscripts than published ones, I really encourage you to consider making that first draft rubbish so that you can make progress and you can ultimately get to the end, go back, do your edits, and release it to readers. And so talking about this process of bringing a story to readers and the amount of time it takes you and how smooth it is the last point I want to make here under effortless action, and that is pace. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. This is something I see a lot of authors who are attempting dictation for the first time, or maybe the 20th time. It took me a lot of tries before I finally reached a point where I could dictate all of my stories. But what I find in my dictation trainings, especially my dictation boot camp, where authors are just getting started with dictating, and this may be you, may have the idea that you need to go fast, that once you start your dictation function, you need to talk, and you need to talk really fast and get the words on the page, because that's the whole point of dictating, is so that you can get your words out fast. I can't believe I just did that. So with dictation, I do talk fast, but with my fiction writing, I go slow. I don't talk at my normal speaking speed with dictation. Even at that, though, I will say that I doubled my writing speed from an average of 1,500 words an hour to 3,000 words an hour with dictation, but I did not start at that pace. And that's what I want to talk about here in this last point of pace, in that slow is smooth, smooth is fast. When you start your dictation function, you do not need to go fast. Even if your goal with dictation is to ultimately be a faster writer, which there are a lot of other reasons, including health and just being able to sustain your career as an author, but you don't have to go fast. Like my mama always taught us when I was growing up, speed comes with practice. And so you want to start off slow with a new skill. And if that new skill is dictation, know that you can go slow. And that slowness will make it a smoother process, a smoother transition from typing your words to speaking them. And ultimately, that smoothness is fast. And so with your fiction writing and new skills that you're adding to it to make it more effortless, pacing is an important part of that process in incorporating it into your author life. All right, in part 3 of the book, Effortless Results, I love the question he asked here. How can we get the highest return on the least effort? And this is where it sounds like we're trying to be lazy and take shortcuts. That's not at all what he talks about in his book, and that's not what I do in my life. I realized I got a lot of my effortless tendencies from my dad, who in his job as a commercial printer, he would see where processes were clunky and where certain tools just didn't work the way they were supposed to. And he would invent solutions for that to make it more effortless for himself and for others, his coworkers, to do their jobs. And he was always doing that around the house and in my lifetime. And so I really think I picked up that mindset from him. And he was not a lazy person, y'all. My dad would work up to 3 jobs in his life to take care of his family. He would work when he was sick. Like, my dad was a hard worker. My brothers looked at this one old picture that we found where he's kind of leaning on his commercial printing press. And one of my brothers said that was one hardworking man. And so I just want to emphasize, if that's a hang up for you, if you came from that generation or that upbringing of we need to work hard and we need to work harder and not be lazy and all of those things, I just want to share the illustration of my dad. He was a hard worker, but he was also always looking for ways to make things work better, to make work and life more effortless. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. So going back to the question in the book here, how can we get the highest return on the least effort? The point that I want to bring out in this one, because I think it's just so important, and that is learn. Leverage the best of what others know. And this is where we get into mentorship and coaching, and specifically what I do with helping authors learn skills and techniques to live their best creative lifestyle. That's why I'm doing this podcast for you today. I want to share the best of what I know of being a confident fiction author so that you can become one too, and do it in a effortless way, skirting the pitfalls or getting out of the hole that you feel you're in right now. And I remember Michael Hyatt saying that he feels like the reason why he is effective as a coach is that he's been in a lot of holes. And that's been me as a fiction author. And so I want to help you either avoid those holes or help pull you out of them so that you can live your best creative lifestyle. And so just listening to this podcast each week, you are leveraging the best of what I know as a fiction author, and you're learning how you can get effortless results in your life. One of the best ways that you can make fiction writing effortless is by mastering dictation. And this is what I teach. I have dictated 12 books now. It's how I write all of my fiction, and it has truly made my fiction writing effortless. Yes, I still have to do my outlines, work through plot holes, create dynamic characters, do all of my research in the historical fiction. It is a lot of work. I'm not a lazy writer, but dictation has made the fiction writing itself effortless. There is just nothing more powerful for me than to open my mouth and see words appear on the page. I will say that for myself and maybe for you, actually getting to that point of effortlessness with speaking words of fiction took a bit of doing. It didn't just happen overnight. And I read the books, I listened to the podcast, I tried to figure this dictation thing out, and it just wasn't working for me. And for the longest time, I was convinced my brain just doesn't work that way. I'm not going to be able to take this effortless path to writing my fiction. And I gave up on it several times. After several attempts, I just kept giving up. I did finally master dictation, and that's why I teach it for authors, so that you don't have to go through what I did in mastering dictation. My goal is to make mastering dictation for you as effortless as possible. And that's why I want to invite you to join the wait list for my next dictation bootcamp. It's not open for enrollment just yet. That's coming soon. It will be at the end of April 2025, and I would love to have you in there. But for right now, go to fictioncourses.com/dictation bootcamp, and you can join the wait list for the bootcamp there. All right, my friend, I hope this was helpful for you in thinking about ways that you can make fiction writing effortless in your life. I do encourage you to go get the book so you can get all of the great content that Greg shares in there. And that book is Effortless by Greg McKeown, McKeown, if I can spell that right, Greg McKeown. And it's a great book. And as you're reading it, I just encourage you to think about how you can apply this to fiction writing so that you can make fiction writing effortless in your life. I will see you next week for another episode of The Confident Fiction Author. Take care.